Younger men are having less and less sex, and it is a global phenomenon. And today we are going to take a look at it together. Why is this happening? What impact does it have on society and on the individual, and what can be done about it? Join me, Lady Saphira, as we look into this topic. Sex today is no longer considered something shameful. Sexuality is celebrated, often pushed into the center of attention, and is basically omnipresent. People today can speak about everything without hesitation, even in public. Sometimes there is almost too much openness rather than too much modesty. We are living in times of sexual freedom. We have endless opportunities to meet people on dating platforms, endless options for contraception, for protection against diseases. So in theory, nothing really stands in the way for people to pursue the rituals of reproduction freely and confidently. But that is not quite the case. Fundamentally, people today have less sex than before. A data survey in the United States from 2009 to 10, as reported the following year, showed an absolute record. 23% of adult Americans had no sex at all in 2018. The Washington Post wrote that within this 23%, a very large group consisted of men around their 20s. From 2008 to 2018, the number of sexless men under the age of 30 almost tripled, rising to 28%. The increase was much steeper than among women. Yes, those are numbers from the US, but this is a worldwide trend. As the NZZ Sonntag reported, there are studies from countries such as Japan, Finland, Great Britain, and Germany that all show the same pattern. Younger people are having sex less often. In Germany, a representative study covering the years 2005 to 2016 found that about 8% of men aged 18 to 30 were sexually inactive in 2005. A little over 10 years later, that number had already risen to 20%. Among women, the effect was somewhat smaller. Many couple therapists and psychologists confirm that sexual desire is dropping. So what is going on? And more importantly, what is the reason that more and more young men report that they are having less sex? It is really interesting. The Washington Post author proposes some possible explanations. One factor: people today generally enter solid partnerships later in life. It used to be different, when people would commit at 20 or 25 and of course have children much earlier. Today people marry much later, at 30, 35, even 40 years old. And this has long been researched. Married people have sex more frequently than those who are not in long-term stable relationships. And if fewer young people are in committed partnerships, then for me it is a logical consequence that they also have less sexual intercourse. In fact, it could also be related to rising unemployment among young men. More than half of unemployed people have no stable partnership, compared with 32% among those who are employed. In other words, less work, less income, fewer stable relationships, and therefore less sex. A chain reaction. Another possible explanation the author mentions is that young men today live with their parents longer than young women. I wasn't aware of that, but it makes sense. If you're still living in Hotel Mama at 28, that would massively limit your opportunities for sex. And the question that becomes interesting here: why are men moving out so late? It used to be so different. People could not wait to move out, stand on their own 2 feet, become independent. This question is not explored, but it is a completely different topic. Then the author mentions another factor: technology. Today, there are many more things one can do around 10 p.m. than before. Gaming, streaming, social media, and so on. Before we get to the consequences of this growing sexlessness, which are extremely fascinating, I want to share a few thoughts of my own. This seems like a first world problem in our wealthy industrial countries. Apparently, financial and social circumstances among young men play a major role and influence their sexual interest. And you don't need to be a genius to see that living at home or getting a job much later naturally impacts your dating and relationship opportunities. Stress, insecurity, and unstable personal circumstances all influence hormones. That is medically proven. Regarding technology, my impression is that many men around 20 to 25 are not especially outgoing socially. I don't mean all of them, but compared to earlier generations, many seem to withdraw. Through internet technology, they isolate themselves more and more in their rooms. They retreat, disconnect from real life, and social isolation is easier and more normal today than ever before. That is why social interactions and relationships for many take place mostly in the virtual world. You could say this generation is occupied with many other things, or simply doesn't feel they have the time or interest to throw themselves into dating life. And even when they do go out, everyone is glued to their smartphone anyway. Speaking of smartphones, you can also find me on Instagram, where I'm often active if you want fun, entertainment, or personal insights. Another important point is online dating and platforms. Nearly every single person today is on at least one online platform. Tinder, with around 50 million users, is one of the most popular apps worldwide. But there is also a lot of frustration there, especially among men. When it comes to access to sex, there is enormous inequality. According to a Tinder experiment, the bottom 80% of men compete for the top 22% of women, while the top 78% of women compete for the top 20% of men. A blogger calculated that the average man has to like 115 women to get a match with a woman of similar attractiveness. Women, however, are 6 times more likely to be liked. This inequality was calculated based on his own data, but the New York Times has similar results. Only 14% of men receive any likes at all, and some men get most of the matches, while many others get almost none. This is precisely around 2010, the same time when sexlessness among men began to rise dramatically. There are voices suggesting a connection between dating apps and increasing sexual frustration among men, and the way women select men for sex. I analyzed this in a previous video. Feel free to watch it. And now comes the fundamental question, and some might argue, why is it even a problem if men have less sex? Can't people be happy without relationships, without sexual relationships, without sexual contact? So what's wrong with that? I'll pass that question to you. What do you think? Does it matter? And if yes, for whom? Leave me a comment. If you are interested in these topics, I often analyze male-female dynamics, and I take a close look at the male perspective, which I think is sometimes overlooked in the public media. So, is long-term sexlessness a problem? What do studies and reports from psychologists, therapists, and sex researchers say? They all point in one direction. For the individual, it is not a good development. Men's Health writes that it can lead to erectile problems. The reason for weaker erections is a lower testosterone level and a lack of practice, because everything requires practice, and that only works with regular activity. Otherwise, performance suffers. Abstinence can also cause blood pressure to rise. Studies show that regular sex lowers blood pressure. Another factor, increased risk of prostate cancer. Regular sex reduces stress, because sex releases hormones that block the stress hormone cortisol. I didn't know this. You also waste a natural muscle growth booster when you abstain. This applies especially to young men. Regular sex increases testosterone levels, which supports healthy muscle growth. Regular sex also strengthens the immune system. Sexlessness weakens it and affects antibody levels. It can also reduce job performance. This is again linked to dopamine release. And finally, in a relationship, long-term sexlessness is not helpful. Apparently, there is a bonding hormone that is released through physical contact and orgasm. It helps partners feel connected and empathetic with each other. Perhaps you have noticed this yourselves. So the conclusion is, for the individual, sexlessness does not have positive effects. On the contrary, the human body is programmed so that sex is a natural remedy for physical and emotional balance and for society. As I said, this is probably just a byproduct of wealth. Historically speaking, we are doing well. We are distracted, we have endless entertainment options, and dating simply feels too exhausting. There is no longer a universal desire to start a family, which used to be a common goal. For many today, this goal is no longer important. A consequence of this is simply fewer children. Whether that is good or bad, everyone must decide for themselves. What can be done? In my opinion, nothing society always changes. Maybe in a few years things will shift again. Maybe the next generation will have completely different desires and feel drawn to real-life connection again. Who knows? It remains exciting. And what do you think? Write it in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you very soon. Take care and goodbye.